We've been having so many very intense debates. There's been some collateral damage, as you can see with Juan. We're all very passionate about what we do. I want to thank Sam and Juan for agreeing to be on this panel and really participate and share with us at Laumeier Sculpture Park their ideas and really helping to expand the conversation that we've got. Both of the works that they're going to be, not just generally the work that they're going to be talking about, but the works they've done at Laumeier really highlight the different aspects of both monument and anti-monument and explore some of the unique historical layering that exists in St. Louis and things that are scattered across the landscape, and we'll be able to see that with the next couple of days. I'm going to first introduce Sam and Juan and then make some introductory remarks about some of the different things that we've done at Laumeier and around the city. Sam Durant is an LA-based artist whose varied activist practice has addressed American myths around cultural, social, and political topics for the past 25 years. Sam received his MFA from California Institute of the Arts in Valencia and his BFA from the Massachusetts College of Art in Boston. Sam currently teaches at Cal Arts and shows with Blum & Poe Gallery Los Angeles, Paula Cooper Gallery in New York, and Sadie Coles Gallery in London. Recent one-person shows of his work have been held at the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, the Massachusetts College of Art in Boston, the Stedelijk Museum für Aktuelle Kunst in Ghent, the Museo d'Arte Contemporanea in Rome, Project Row Houses in Houston, and the Institute of Visual Arts Innova at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Now I throw that one in, not a big institution, but it's actually the first time I had the chance to work with Sam. And I admire his practice and his ideas, and he's as passionate about politics and cultural history as I am, so I always like our conversations. Such as MoCA in LA, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and Cal Arts, and was an artist in residence at the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis. Sam's work helped drive and inspire many of the ideas that I had for the show at Mound City that's at Laumeier, opening tomorrow night. This is the show that I co-curated with Dana Turkovich, our curator of exhibitions. And Sam has produced a very provocative installation at Laumeier, but in previous works as well, and he'll talk a little bit about that. I think it's interesting to think about how monuments dedicated to white immigrant triumph over native peoples during the Indian Wars of the 19th century has been a topic of Sam's work. I mean, this is a fairly hidden scar in the American psyche, and I think that he'll be able to talk a little bit about how that relates to the piece that we've got at Laumeier. Juan William Chávez was born in Lima, Peru. He's an artist and cultural activist who explores the potential of space through creative initiatives that address community and cultural issues. He's exhibited at venues such as Art in General in New York, the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, and the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, the Netherlands. In 2006, Juan founded Boots Contemporary Art Space on Cherokee Street in South St. Louis, a nonprofit organization that offered support to emerging artists and curators. Juan closed Boots in 2010 to focus primarily on socially engaged projects and collaborations in North St. Louis. He is the director with collaborator and director of programming and sustainability, Kirsten Torres, of the Northside Workshop in North St. Louis. The Northside Workshop is a community-based artist project that uses agriculture as a trigger for cultural exploration of ethnicity and place. Juan's projects include Urban Expression for the Pulitzer Foundation for the Arts and the Pruitt-Igoe Bee Sanctuary, which is a project he's expressed in different places, including Laumeier Sculpture Park. And I want to say that Northside Workshop and Laumeier have been working for a couple of years to conjoin our different takes on landscape and agriculture and the creating of place through sculpture and through landscape and food. We've been sharing conceptual ideas, but also artists. Recently, we had Pearl Fryer in to do some topiary at Laumeier. He did a really great training program for kids, although I do understand that he let a kid use a chainsaw. which I don't know if it would have been covered under our insurance. I would hope that would have been covered under your insurance. But it's a really great collaboration, and it's part and parcel of what we're trying to do at Laumeier, which is to return ideas of what does being an urban person back into the city. Laumeier, as you'll see tomorrow, is in a suburb, and we're part of early urban sprawl. So early 20th century Laumeier was founded, so we're really trying to reverse the sprawl back into the city. Which is a beautiful town. St. Louis is a beautiful town, but it's been really very much abandoned. Juan has received awards and grants from Creative Capital, the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts, Art Matters, and the Gateway Foundation. Okay. So the title of this panel is evocative of the historical facts and the cultural residue that define St. Louis. This conversation is particularly relevant for me and St. Louisans in the 200th anniversary of the modern founding of our city, because I think that as a chance for us to look forwards, we must look backwards as well. And there's a lot of things that are sort of swept into one big package of St. Louis that I think we really were going to be talking about in the next couple of days. St. Louis was technically founded 1,000 years ago by the Mississippian peoples who generally focused over at Cahokia. And so while the important mound culture of our region is underknown relative to ancient sites around the country and the globe, there are other layers of succession cultures that exist here. And Juan's going to be talking a little bit about that here. I'm adapting the phrase succession landscape, which I first read in Charles Mann's book, 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus. And instead of speaking of succession landscape, I'm talking about cultures, those traces of past habitation and human activity that are still visible on our built and natural environment. At the heart of my interest in these oppositional terms, monument, anti-monument, is the ironic juxtaposition at the heart of our community and our two most important monuments. So here we have the Gateway Arch. I like to say in a rather irreverent way that the arch is an exquisite sculpture, however, the city landscape is not that pretty. So maybe we could finish the job of knocking down some of those buildings and really make the arch look as beautiful as it could look. And then we have the mounds over Cahokia. So this is an artist rendition of what Cahokia might have looked like 1,000 years ago. There were mounds across the region. The bulk of them were bulldozed up through the 19th, early 20th century. I am sorry to say, however, that mounds are still being knocked down in the region. St. Louis, in some ways, is defined by these anti-monuments, just as the mounds are an important shadow history for us. In a way, the Gateway Arch holds within it many, many meanings, some of which are celebratory, some of which are not. And so when we live in St. Louis, we're looking at this sort of simultaneous history that exists in our landscape. This quote from Jimmy Durant is from an interview with him in 1994, and succinctly states about how past cultures really haunt our present. And St. Louis is in a really very important period in its own history. 1904 is a year that people talk here about a lot, as if it was yesterday. 1904 was the date of the World's Fair in St. Louis, and that's when we were the 4th largest city in the country. Now we're the 24th largest city. And so I think that a lot of the things that we're thinking about generally is how do we overcome this mourning of the great past, but really think about a much better future for ourselves. And I'm really happy that we're starting this conference with this particular panel, because I think Sam and Juan really do think about the admixture of culture and history. I'll turn this over to Sam and Juan very quickly, but I just wanted to show you some images at Laumeier Sculpture Park. This is a piece by Beverly Pepper called Cromlech Glen from 1985. This idea of exploring the ruins of past civilizations and landscapes at Laumeier dates back to the very beginning of our founding in 1976. This is a piece that Pepper made after she visited Cambodia and then also St. Louis. And In some ways, it evidences this idea of spatial overwriting, a term used by Patricia Rubbertone in her book, Archaeology of Placemaking, Monuments, Memories, and Engagement in Native North America. Crumlin Glen is one of the largest site-specific pieces at Laumeier and fulfills the role of monument by its sort of massive volume, but it also suggests the past as well, and so it embodies both monument and anti-monument. She buried this piece along our nature trail and then planted it in with trees as if it's an object that you would find, stumbling upon it as if you were a cultural archaeologist. And I think that this is particularly interesting as we think about how societies rise and fall. With our position inside a suburb, this piece makes me think in this context that perhaps at some point we're looking at the collapse of suburbs with the economy changing the way that it has. I think that this is, as we're thinking about how to revitalize cities through public art activities, in fact, the cultural deserts of the suburbs are an equally important subject of concern. This is a multiple-part piece by the artist Richard Fleischner at Laumeier called St. Louis Project from 1989. It's a 5-part piece, and in some ways, Fleischner built into his piece this idea of layering successive cultures by putting the piece on both sides of this very busy wrought road. So you can see the road in the foreground, of course, but then these architectural ruins, and he planted in some of these trees as well. And so you're looking all the way at the end as if it's some sort of, celebratory longhouse. This is the view, the opposite direction towards Laumeier's house. And what's important to me about this, that although, Pepper's ruins were really about sort of the destruction of cultures and the loss that we experience through the loss of cultures, Fleischner in a way celebrates the fact and recognizes the fact that we're constantly building. We're building upon the past in front of us. And this is a piece that we did as part of our exhibition Camp Out, Finding Home in an Unstable World, part of our Archaeology of Place series. This is by the British artist Emily Speed, and this is called Inhabitant St Louis from 2012. And Speed was inspired by the different architectural fragments that you can find throughout the St. Louis region, where we have colonial French architecture, some Spanish architecture, Native American architecture, bad corporate 70s architecture, bad corporate 80s architecture, lots of bad architecture, but lots of fantastic architecture. But she also acknowledges the fact that we take these fragments of the world we grow up in around with us. And so you can see her feet just sort of coming down below. And she walked around the park very, very slowly, not bonking into anybody, but she really performed architecture and demonstrated how it is that it comes around with us. And in some ways, Speed is really anti-monument. She's really part of a new genre of public artist, doing things that are temporary, that are a little bit fugitive, but nonetheless address what it means to be living in the environment where we live. This phrase is rather dramatic, I would say. Landscape is the victim of history, and this is a quote by Rebecca Solnit in her book, Savage Dreams. And in this book, she talks about how a lot of the white settlers coming to this country really started to marshal their resources to do these enormous earthworks, dams, hydroelectric projects, railroads, cities. But Solnit and Mann have written also extensively about how humans have always managed landscape, whether it's a giant mound or a giant pyramid out of stone. At Laumeier, we are doing a show called Mound City, really reflecting on these sort of extreme layers of succession cultures in the community. This is a drawing for the piece Earth Mover by Marie Watt, and you'll see this piece tomorrow. And what she has done is looked at the different ways in which we've accelerated the rapid decline of our landscapes, or we've changed our landscapes. And so you see a giant tractor tire that's embedded in the landscape, and then to its right is a little bronze cast basket that the people in Cahokia would have used to move the millions of cubic square feet of land to actually create all of the mounds. And so you'll see this piece tomorrow. There'll be more information in the catalog that we handed out to you. And so she's really combining the extreme scope, the change in the scope and scale of the earth-moving activities of the ancient Mississippian cultures with what we do today. And then this is a piece by Jeffrey Kraswick where he's effectively building his own ruin into the park. And Jeffrey's reflecting on the evacuation of many of the communities in the city of St. Louis, particularly Old North, by bringing in bricks that have been left over from what we call brick eaters, people who actually scour the neighborhoods, find empty buildings, and then take them apart brick by brick to sell to other people. And then they just abandon the bricks on the sidewalk because they're broken. And so he's building his own modern ruin, but he's actually solicited a lot of people in the city of St. Louis to give them quotes about the hopes and dreams that they might have, so that this is an effective time capsule. In 100 years or so, if the piece is still existing, if it's covered by dirt, archaeologists will maybe have a little more material to work with. So that's the end of my talk. Sam, if I can invite you up to come and speak about your work.
Hello, good afternoon. It's nice to see everybody here, and thank you, Mary Lou, for that nice introduction and for the invitation to do a project at Laumeier as part of the Mound City project, and to come talk today to this wonderful group. So I'll talk about a couple of projects that I've done in the last few years that somehow engage the public in various ways. This is a work called Scaffold, which was first installed in Kassel, Germany, last summer, 2012. No, 2 years ago? I can't remember what year we're in. I guess it was 2 years ago. In the middle of a big park in the city of Kassel, it's called the Auer Park, and it was an old imperial, German imperial sort of garden in front of the summer palace. And this architectural construction was installed sort of in the center in front of a lake and at the end of a long sort of passageway between the palace and the orangerie, the summer palace, and the lake. And it is a combination of several different gallows, scaffolds, from noteworthy executions in the history of the United States. And then layered, basically, the platforms kind of layered up on top of each other. So you get this sort of almost like a kind of play structure looking construction, which you can climb up on and have a view of the park and the lake. And so it had a very interesting relationship to the landscape there. And this is part of the Documenta exhibition, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. So it had over 1 million visitors, and mainly people from Germany. And we can talk a little more about why I would do a work dealing with American history and capital punishment in the American context. Why do it in Europe? And that's an interesting situation. This is actually where it currently is, which is in The Hague, in the Netherlands, in the international zone, as part of an initiative that the city's doing, believe it or not, to raise awareness within the Netherlands about the presence of the International Criminal Courts, the International Court of Justice, and all the social justice, all the international social justice organizations and so forth that are there in The Hague, which apparently people in the Netherlands don't know. And the title of the exhibition, interestingly, is called See You in The Hague, which everyone in the world knows what that means. So it's in this quite a different setting, but also a kind of a pastoral setting between different court buildings and tribunals, and also very close to the sculpture of Nelson Mandela, which, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to take a look at that sculpture. It's, in terms of figurative public monument, memorial type of a thing, it's very interesting how it was done. But anyway, one of the things I was interested in this work is to be used literally as a platform for performances, readings, gatherings, screenings, et cetera, and that's what, this is the images that you see here. One of the curators organized an entire day of music dedicated to murder ballads. And it was a very, it seemed a little, sort of kitschy in a way to me when he first proposed it. But then when I thought about it, I realized that one of the few cultural arenas where we can speak about capital punishment is in music. And so it actually seems a little trite maybe, but after spending some time there and listening to this, it occurred to me, that it's not a subject that finds its way into cultural expression very often, except in music. And so that was an interesting kind of experience. This is a very different kind of project. I was invited by the Getty Center, the Getty Museum's education department, to do an artist in residency, and from that to produce some kind of a project with the education department. And so I came up with the idea that I would collaborate with the education department, which was frustrating for them, I think. It's difficult to try to collaborate with an artist. That's, in some senses, they told me, that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to bring them something, the artist's perspective. And I was asking them, in a sense, to, collaborate and contribute. And anyway, so we started off by talking about, well, what constituency does the education department feel that is underserved at the museum? And it came out through discussions with all these different people that really just the sort of average everyday visitor at the Getty. They have programs that engage, children, adults in specific ways. They have tours. They have all these programs. They go out and do things in the schools and other institutions in the city. But they felt like they don't do a great job of sort of, I don't know, serving the visitor who's not going to engage in these other programs. So I had the idea, well, why don't we, ask them what they think? And they thought that was an interesting idea. So we came up with this thing called What is a Museum? And there was a series of signs all over the Getty Center, Getty Museum, asking a set of questions that we came up with. And some of the questions sort of have a range of different try to cover a range of different kinds of questions that people might have. And then it was connected to an online interface, various kinds of online interfaces. You could do it with Twitter. There was a website that you could go to, and then there were ways you could do it in analog, in the analog mode by writing on a piece of paper. Though for me, I was really interested, as they were, in exploring modes of using the internet and digital technology and social media. I'd never done Twitter. I'd never done Facebook. I know what a website is, but that's about as far as I made it. Anyway, they put these things on the trolleys that take you up and down from the parking garage. Those of you that haven't been to the Getty, you have to park at the bottom of the hill and take a trolley up to the museum. And here's a they designed a really the beautiful website, and you just click on one of these bars and you can answer the question, and then it puts it into a bin basically with all the answers to all the questions in there, so you kind of have an access to all the ways people have responded to these different questions, and quite interesting. I was just thinking about the father, or maybe I shouldn't use that term, Stuart Hall, who passed away recently. I was going to say the father of cultural studies, the person who really invented it, in a sense. You know, who really felt that you know, so-called consumers of entertainment, of culture, etc., are not as passive as we think. And this project, I think, for me, really proved that point. There were so many really interesting answers, both sort of jokes that proved to be very interesting, and that website's still up, so if you're curious, you could go check it out, but also more thoughtful things. And I embrace the marketing aesthetic of that I think all cultural institutions are engaged in now. And you know, this project obviously, you know, walks a fine line between things that, you know, museums are already doing in terms of marketing and branding and all these things. But I think, you know, we tried, the education department, people that worked on it, we tried to make it a less about a branded experience and more about a real interactive platform, I guess. And this is a proposal. For many years I've done proposals for monuments, and these are completely fictitious proposals. No one asked for these monuments to be proposed. And this one is called a proposal for a public fountain. And I was thinking about doing a fountain, and I saw these two images in my research and put them together. So the water cannon and the fleeing anarchist protester. And this is, I made proposals in different cities. This is in Rome, the city of fountains. So you would have this in a public square or something like that at full scale. And I also did a maquette version, which you see here in a gallery space in London, where it was shown. And the truck, the water cannon, and the figure are made from marble. So it adopts the materials of fountains and public sculpture, and then, you know, a simulated cobblestone space that acts as a drain for the recirculation. And you see some drawings on the wall there that refer, you know, to the project. I mean, when I started doing these proposals for monuments in the 90s, I had some interest in actually doing some of them, and I was, you know, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to actually make a monument, you know, this one I don't think would really be in any sense a monument or a memorial. But some of the other ones had that possibility, and as an artist, I was very skeptical, and still am, of the notion of making a monument or a memorial. This is a project that I think perhaps was one of the things that Mary Lou might have been thinking about when she invited me to participate in the exhibition, the Mound City exhibition, and this is a project called white and Indian dead monuments transpositions to Washington, D.C. And this is an existing monument in Massachusetts, which is commemorating what's called the Bloody Brook Massacre, which took place in the early 17th century, where a confederation of Native American groups were fighting against the English settlers, English and French settlers, and massacred a column of English traders, hence the Bloody Brook. So I researched basically all of these non-figurative monuments all over the country, either to the massacre of whites or to Native Americans. And I very, very strict guidelines, and there were no sort of military monuments included. It was only either militias or innocents, non-military victims, let's say. And the idea was to move all of these, try this pointer out here, to move all of these monuments to the Washington Mall and line them up alongside the reflecting pool, obviously in conjunction with the father of all monuments. So these are all the ones to white settlers, and then it's probably impossible to see, but there's a small group down here that were the monuments dedicated to Native Americans. And here you see the first time it was shown in New York at Paula Cooper Gallery. You see the model, and then around it are the replicas of the, not to scale, they're about 20% scale. These are replicas of the monuments to Native Americans, and then in the main space you have the monuments to the white settlers killed. And a friend commented during the opening that it was like having a cocktail party in a graveyard. Not a very festive scene. But a big part of this project was the idea that in conquest, in war, in domination, and so forth, both sides are harmed. Not just the victims, but the victors are also harmed in this. And thinking about Mary Lou's presentation of Jimmy Durham's quote, I agree wholeheartedly with Jimmy's assessment. And then this is, much of my work is sort of engaged in this argument. And then I'll just say a few words about the project here that hopefully you'll all get to see at some point. That's out at Laumeier now. And when I first came to St. Louis, when Mary Lou first invited me, we visited many sites and sites of public art, museums, institutions, so forth. I believe it's at the History Museum here. I saw this image that really caught my attention. And I mean, one of the reasons is kind of a little bit of a personal aside, but the man who made this sculpture is Cyrus Dallin, who has an existing, he made a series of 3 memorials, in a sense, to Native Americans, and one of them is in front of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I grew up there, so it's a very early memory for me, seeing, it's the one, you've probably seen it, where the man is sitting on top of the horse, like, in this kind of almost Christ-like gesture. And this one, of course, you read the story, and it captures so much about this idea of the past and memory, and even though the physical object has disappeared. The issues to which it's dedicated have not. So thinking back to the Washington Monument, we see the penetration of the arch. You know, you probably can't see this, but I found this amazing postcard which really captures it. So you have the actual, the explosion of joy with the penetration of the arch. So I was thinking about the arch in obviously in psychoanalytic terms, symbolic terms, the negative space and so forth, to be filled, the negative space, the west, the empty west, wide open, spread open wide for the conquest, for the taking, for the filling up of, as Rebecca Solnit talks about, the filling up of the natural world. In researching the arch, I was struck by this paragraph. This is from their from the museum's the Museum of Westward Expansion, I believe it's called, from their website. You know, how did this arch? How did we get this shape? And so my work is basically about 3 words in there: the free hanging chain, and again using a kind of free associative. Maybe you could say a kind of psychoanalytic approach. You know, what does the word free mean? What does the word hanging mean? What does the word chain mean? Or what are their meanings? They're all words that have many meanings, depending on the context, depending on who's speaking that word. And so that's what I was sort of interested in here. And you know, these are some examples that started to come to mind of what a free hanging chain might conjure up. This is the infamous Gina High School. You might remember the Gina 6 trial from a few years ago, where a noose was hung in a tree in the schoolyard to tell the black children, to give them a message about who was allowed to sit underneath the tree. And this just happened a couple of years ago. So the term hanging obviously can have multiple meanings. You know, issues of control, of inclusion and exclusion. This was an early proposal, because you can see the St. Louis Arch from the top of this this particular mound. I was interested in maybe the idea of having a juxtaposition between the two catenary arches, and that, you know, I'm not sure even if that had been approved, if it would have been impossible to do without digging into the ground, which one would not do there. And then the other part was to install the chains at Laumeier, which is what actually we did do. So if you go on refresh my memory on the name of the trail, Whitaker Woods Trail, you'll see a series of chains way up in the trees that are hanging in catenary loops up above. And with that, I will introduce Juan Chávez to finish off here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Mary Lou and all the people behind Sculpture City. Feel really honored to be on this panel. My talk's I have a lot of images, so I'm gonna kind of fly through them. But I'm going to kind of give you an outline because they all kind of jump around a little bit. The first few slides, I'm going to talk about briefly about how I look at Mound City in terms of relating it to my practice. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the Northside Workshop was created, and then I'm going to end on the Prodigal Bee Sanctuary Project. So for the mounds, this is an etching of one of the biggest mounds that was on the St. Louis side, referred to as Big Mound. And it was around, where was it? It was around, there's a monument, this is a photograph here. There's a monument that's really close to Broadway and Old North. So this is a monument that I drive by almost every day heading to the Northside Workshop. This is a photograph of what the mound looked like. And this is a photograph of St. Louis since tearing it apart. This is the mound. This is a memorial to the mound, which you can see the plaque has been temporarily removed. But what I like about this image here is that St. Louisans, we still create mounds. So in the distance, there's another mound being developed, which is the creation of the new bridge that we just built. This is a wood hedge that is located at the Cahokia Mounds. It's a kind of calendar that the Cahokian peoples made, somewhat of a sundial. And I was particularly inspired by this piece because I created a sculpture at Laumeier, which I took the blueprint of the Prodigal housing projects and used these telephone poles to create a site-specific sculpture at Laumeier. This piece is called Sacred Real Estate. I'll talk a little bit more about sacred real estate as I get further into the Prodigal project. This is an image of the Sugarloaf Mound, which is also located on the St. Louis side. It's off Highway 55 in South St. Louis. What's interesting is that someone built a house on it, and that house is still there. It's been bought recently by a nonprofit to actually turn it into some kind of educational center. But this is a photograph that I did called Double Loaf, which references the built of the photograph of the mound and then the photograph of the house being built. So why I showed you those images is because they have to do with landscape, building, and brick homes, essentially. And these are the things that I'm very interested in, the natural and the built environment. After my gallery closed in 2009, I was invited by the Pulitzer Foundations for the Arts to curate and lead a neighborhood-based program with artist Theaster Gates, along with several teaching artists. I was one of those teaching artists, and one of the exercises that we did is that we went around and drew basically crumbling buildings. This particular scene here is I'm leading a drawing workshop where the students were drawing this kind of iconic, kind of monument-like burnt down gymnasium in High Park. These are some of the drawings, and then we had somewhat of a kind of exhibition at the school. But what was really kind of what transformed I show this image here because it really transformed the way I look at the built environment. And some of the comments that the school children were telling me is that the drawing was first about abandonment. Then it became more about that it's ugly. And then it slowly kind of took an interesting turn where they started relating it to a body, like a dead body, a rotting corpse. And then it kind of really turned into anger, like why is this not cleaned up? And then it ended on that the city didn't care about them. So it was a very powerful workshop for me that inspired me to do more investigation in the brick theft problem here in St. Louis, as Mary Lou mentioned in her notes, the brick eaters. This is also a pretty, for me, a kind of iconic, somewhat monument to brick eaters. And you can always tell a house that has been picked apart is because everything is kind of still there. You see all 3 floors, but the bricks are the ones that are gone, and it's basically collapsing on its own weight and gravity. Shortly after that project, I was invited by the Old North Restoration Group to see if I was interested in creating some kind of art program in the Old North neighborhood. They had identified a building, which was this one here. And some of the issues or some of the thoughts that I had about this building were on 2 levels. One is that before we go jumping into a building, we had to do some programming to see what kind of things would a neighborhood want inside of a building, or what kind of programmings happen in this building. The second thing was more how the Old North Restoration Group approached these buildings. And as you can tell here, they have these boards, because this wall is buckling, and it's on the verge of collapse. Now going back to the children, saying that comparing the building to a dead body, I saw this was a very different language, helpful language, that instead of a dead body, that maybe this building had a cast on its arm, and that the deterioration had somewhat stopped, and that hope is around the corner. So symbolically, I really found a connection with this building. And over a 2-year period, we were able to raise enough money to complete this building. So this is the restacking of the wall, which I'm recording the process here. And this is what it turned out to be. This is the North Side Workshop. And this space is dedicated to addressing cultural community issues in North St. Louis. Simultaneously, as I was doing this project in Hyde Park, I was driving by the Prodigal site. And kind of once again, just like the big mound monument, I started asking myself questions of the, kind of refreshing my memory of what the Prodigal project was, in particular, its relationship to history and the history of St. Louis. All 33 buildings were imploded in the 70s, leaving this massive vacant lot. Now, the conversation surrounding Prodigal is really about a lot of the negativity and the destruction of the buildings, and there's a lot of finger pointing and stuff. But my project, I was really interested in continuing the conversation of Prodigal, and the conversation continues that over the years it has turned itself into an urban forest. Here's a little aerial view here. It was that forest that really inspired me to go in and to start asking questions. My studio practice, when I actually create art in a traditional sense, photographs, drawings, videos, it's a way for me to conduct research as a way, and also as a way to kind of think about my projects. So I'm very process-based. Here's some of the photographs that I took. This is an existing lamppost from one of the parking lots that kind of pops out through this dense, all the plant life here. So I started asking myself, when you go in there, for me, it's very beautiful, and the trees kind of muffle a lot of the sound in the city, and so you get a sense of a sanctuary. So I created this sculpture that was dedicated to bees, because I thought bees needed a sanctuary. And this is where the Prodigal Bee Sanctuary project started. This project is a proposal to the city of St. Louis to transform the urban forest into a public space that can help cultivate community through beekeeping and urban agriculture. The sculpture references the Massacre design of the buildings. So I asked myself, once again, why do bees need a sanctuary? Some of you might know that there's a thing called colony collapse disorder, where bees are disappearing all over the world. This is a huge issue because bees pollinate the majority of our food. We actually rely on them for our survival. At the same time, this article came out, and St. Louis population also fell. So this was an interesting turning point in the projects because St. Louis's and bees were actually in the same boat. So I thought to myself, why don't we start a partnership? So to discover this partnership, I had to go back to the beginning of our relationship with bees. And that took me to southern part of Spain, where I documented and saw the first recording of humans interacting with bees. This is the man of Bicorp. This is kind of a diagram of the cave drawings. Man of Bicorp, little teeny guy up there. But what's interesting when you look at all the surrounding drawings, you see animals of the hunt, you see tools of the hunt, some domesticated animals. And I asked myself, what was so important 8,000 years ago that we had to put it up on the wall? And the best answer I could come up was survival. And so beekeeping was part of that survival. The next question I had to ask myself is, can bees be in public space? This is an article that came out in St. Louis of an older person making a person remove her one beehive from a community garden. So I had to go out and find a model of bees in public space. Since St. Louis has a strong French influence, I started looking at the French kind of landscape architecture, and that led me to the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris, France, which the garden has the oldest beekeeping school in the world. They have over 1 million bees in the school, and the school is embedded and woven into the park. As you can tell by this, you see Parisians relaxing, drinking wine, eating cheese, and no one's getting stung. In addition, there's an orchard in the park among also lots of flowers. And at the end, they have a kind of harvest that kind of helps sustain the program. Inspired by this, I came back and kind of put together this somewhat proposal for the Prodigal site. Not having access to the site, we decided to take the proposal off the page and actually implement it at the North Side Workshop, transforming this vacant lot into a pilot program outside classroom. This happened in 2012 with the help of the Guggenheim Foundation and the Graham Foundation. And we've been teaching workshops that are focused on community building through beekeeping, agriculture, and recently we started adding cooking to the program. Old North is basically a food desert, and it has a really low nutrition. If you look at the nutrition map, it's one of the hotbeds here. So this is really an important thing. We feel that nutrition is really connected to a lot of things relating to development and education, and really trying to reconnect people back with where their food comes from. When you start growing stuff, you produce stuff. So we started having to can, and this is a project that Laumeier invited us to at the Chicago Art Fair. My partner, Kirsten Torres, says that we had the best prices at the fair. But a great thing that happened out of this is that we actually met the great niece of Igo from Prodigal, and turned out she was an art teacher working in the public schools, so we had a really nice conversation. As my projects, as I continue working with bees, they teach me so much about how to live, and one thing that fascinates me is bees are referred to as a superorganism, meaning that they function as one being. The queen being the head, the worker bees being the hands, reproductive, so on and so forth. And I started thinking about how, what if humans adapt this kind of superorganism aspect? What if you transform other things into somewhat of a hive? Our very beginning stages of this new project is this grocery store that's right across the street from the Northside Workshop. It was open for about 2 years, struggled a little bit, and then eventually closed. And we're currently trying to reopen it by installing a professional kitchen that can actually start doing nutrition and cooking classes. And with the help of the Kransberg Art Foundation and our tours designed, we think we have a good shot of maybe developing this grocery store. However, some of these projects are about the built environment, but I also believe that simple gestures also kind of tip the hat to, or are the kind of steps to social change, transformation, and how we look at our own history in St. Louis. This is a group of students that I took to the actual Prodigal site, which we did this kind of beautification exercise. And what's really interesting about this exercise is, yes, it's about picking up trash, but at the same time, it's also about discovery. What happens when I look underneath this bush to grab this bag? What happens if I look through the fence into the woods? Reconnecting people back with landscape and having a deeper ecology with who we are. And I'll leave on end on this final note is that that the Prodigal history books are still open, and that we can end this history on a positive note by transforming one of the worst examples of public housing into a leading example of renewal. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam and Juan, for these conversations. I think I'm going to open it up to the audience, actually, for some questions. I have some, but I could talk all day, and maybe it'd be better to hear you talk. He is going to come. There is a microphone in the audience so that we don't have to repeat it. We don't want to lose the nuance of the questions.
I have a question for Sam and then one for Juan. Should I say both of them or just one?
You can ask Sam a question, then follow up.
Okay. So for Sam, for your Who is a Museum For project, I was just wondering how successful do you think that project was, considering people's access to computers and like email technology, getting onto websites at the time? Because I think you said yourself that you don't really use the websites that much.
Yeah, there were kiosks on site at the Getty, so visitors could log, or they were already logged in and everything, so they could just go to the iPad kiosks and access that way. So if there were visitors there that didn't have access to the internet, they could use it on site. But that's a big question. That's something that we talked about a lot at the museum.
So then it was geared more towards people who already like attend the museum than those who don't usually?
Yeah, primarily it was for the visitors to the museum. And as I said, there were also at those kiosks, there were forms that they could handwrite the answers in and turn them in if they didn't, feel comfortable using the iPad or whatever.
Oh, great, that's good to know. Okay, so, and for Juan, I was wondering with all of your projects, how often are you offering workshops to the kids in the neighborhood?
Our workshops kind of come in a lot of different forms. Since we're very much a kind of grassroots nonprofit, a lot of our programming kind of depends on our funding and our collaborations. But we offer, our agriculture program happens every year in the late summer. And so a lot of programming happens during that time. In addition, we also kind of open our doors when the neighborhood also has events like their trick-or-treating day. We open up our doors. For the house tour in Old North, we open up our doors. In addition to that, I guess the way I kind of look at it not during the grow season, we collaborate with a lot of institutions, Laumeier being one of them, and all those collaborations are kind of tailor-made. So they kind of they happen depending on a lot of different resources. So we don't have a concrete schedule, but the one thing that is regular is our Young Honey Crew program.
Okay. Oh, and actually, the renovation of the grocery store into the beehive, are in your proposal, are you considering the participation of the community garden next door?
Oh yeah, they're connected. Yeah, like it's a very early project. It's actually a pretty big project because it involves tons of people. The neighborhood being a huge partner.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions right here? A minute for the microphone to get there, unless you want to yell. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's a long conversation, and that's I think we're maybe hopefully we're in a transitional moment where we're questioning what constitutes the monument, the memorial. Why do we need them? What do they do? Whose interests are represented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all, because of all these questions, I would say I'm skeptical. The older models, the 19th century models, no longer seem relevant. What do we do going forward, I guess, is the question. And because I think we need to change, or at least open the debate about what we want them to be. Because I don't think the question of was really posed. Why do we need a memorial or a monument to this or that? We never asked that question, really. So I hope we're at the time. I mean, I think this conference is dedicated to that very question, and so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the best I can do right now.
What was your second question?
I mean, for me, the question, one of the first questions I kind of asked myself is that I thought, since the land was kind of designated to community, a group of people, that somehow in the continuing of the conversation, it should be for the people too. Prodigal was an unnatural structure that housed nature, human beings, and now Prodigal is nature. So what community could naturally exist there? So for me, that community is bees. But to take it a step further, which is I'll kind of just simply state it, is that if you build a better environment for bees, you actually build a better environment for humans. And that's how I kind of look at it. Is this site solely dedicated to a bee sanctuary? I don't know yet. Will bees make it to the end of the proposal? I don't know. But it's a way for me to kind of start up the story and the conversation. And through our pilot project, we're doing that right now. We're seeing what works, what doesn't work, how can we make this a bigger picture? What are some of the issues that come with urban agriculture? How do we address food rights and things like that? So it's a very long process, and I recently said this is probably going to be a life's work. So yeah, we're constantly trying to figure out and adjust things as we move along.
One thing I find interesting about Prodigal is you coming in to repurpose this space, which, although commonly referred to as a failed social experiment, it actually is a monument to active non-participation by regional and local governments. There is a sister development in New York City that happened at the same time, which is still currently functioning with multi-generational families living in it. And so I think to refer to it as a failed social experiment, you have to look at the support that it received. But I also find it interesting as you're coming in and taking this abandoned space that was a public space and now trying to repurpose it as something that may actually fit the neighborhood even more appropriately than its original purpose.
Right. Yeah, for me, and this is a huge project, and for me to sum it up in slides is, you're getting kind of the tip of the iceberg. But education's a huge component to this project. Education's a big component to a lot of my projects. And the fact that there's a public school right next door to the forest is a big draw for me. That is basically, you could turn this into a public space, develop a curriculum, and actually get really hands-on experience with the landscape as well with like history. In addition to use more bees metaphors, is that honey is a huge healing agent, and I think that we as St. Louisans, we've never been able to heal this history, and so I'm really interested about going back in time by working on things in the present, and that this kind of stamp of failure, one of the worst, you just hear all these kind of buzzwords, that we don't have to take that we can transform this. We as people that live here, we should fight for how our history is translated, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of as this kind of mark, but that we can still address it and change the ending. So I think that's one of the things that really attracts me to this project.
think Sam's skepticism is well understood, and actually one of the things that I didn't say earlier was, you know, the compromise that artists have to go through often for public art would be something that would certainly prohibit artists from doing public art. I think that, you know, in some ways what's really interesting is this issue of we've transformed perhaps from an exclusive model where artwork is commissioned by public governing bodies, municipalities, cities, to things that are much more curated. And I think this is one of the benefits of being at a place like Laumeier or a museum, where it's a curated process. It's not that sort of reliance on public. But I think that maybe artists are more interested in anti-monuments now because of the compromise for public space. What is truly public space? And so I think also the idea that we can that an artist is obliged to represent the public in public art it's daunting, it's unreasonable, and I think that it's used as a bludgeon to punish artists that American culture is in such disarray. There's no such thing as a cohesive American, you know, character, if there ever was one. And I think this is one of the things about 19th century. It was a country that was growing, and to do an image of Abraham Lincoln is to really suggest that everybody adheres to the policies that Abraham Lincoln represented. But I'll turn it over to Sam, because he's the one who brought the skepticism up, so I think that I'll let him speak a bit more.
Well, what Juan said, I think, is really interesting in this regard, because, I mean, I don't think you're trying to make a monument at Prodigal. Prodigal, as it stands now, is a monument, or maybe it's an anti-monument. It's a monument to these all these different forms of negativities. This gentleman mentioned the withdrawal of services, support, and money as the reason why it failed, which is absolutely true. You can look at the public school system, which is a great example of that. And you can see public schools thriving, producing incredible results in the suburbs. And the same public schools in the inner city failing miserably. And that's very simple, you know. We don't say that public schools, or I don't know, I hope we don't say that public schools are a failed social experiment because of some of the schools that we've withdrawn our funding and support from are failing. So, I'm on a tangent. Public education is something that's, I think, incredibly important, and that's why Juan's project, I think, is so interesting in the sense of a holistic approach to public art, and also a public art which is, you know, in a sense, it's a bubbling up from the grassroots, literally, to take over public space, which is there increasingly is basically no public space really left in the United States. Everything's privatized now. Anyway, I'm rambling here. Juan, say something about skepticism.
Skepticism.
We should all be skeptical, though. I mean, this is the basis of intellectual work, right?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, the kind of plop down art, or, you know, can easily turn into like art pollution. You know, like it's too much stuff here, and that, you know, I started thinking about. We'll call it anti-monument, is when my gallery closed. You know, it was a building, an old building. It required money to keep it going and all this other stuff. And so when it closed, I kind of referred to it as homeless. And so I wasn't really interested in another building. I wanted to see what naturally exists that can just be activated through program. You know, like. You know, and so that's, I mean, I ended up getting another building in the process, which was complemented with these vacant lots on either side, so it was kind of a happy balance. But yeah, I feel like when you do a monument, it's set in stone of what this thing's going to be, and as people, we change constantly, And what is good for right now is not going to be good tomorrow. And I feel to have a mind of don't know, where you can slowly build the conversation, slowly implement, test some pilot projects, that eventually through, you know, a web of conversations and people, you get to a situation that everyone is kind of benefiting. I like to say, you know, if I do my job right, you know, it starts with an artist, but it will end in a group. So I feel like that's how I approach the monument aspect.
Thank you so much, Juan and Sam, for being here. I'm afraid we don't have time for... Absolutely. Quick.
Just one quick response. I think Juan said it, you know, perfectly. There's an art historian who's written a couple of books about this exact thing named Grant Kester, and I would encourage you. Probably many of you know his work, but Conversation Pieces and One Place After Another, which are amazing art historical arguments for exactly what Juan's calling for. Kester, K-E-S-T-E-R.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm being cut off. Since you all know what Sam and Juan look like, you can pigeonhole them as we take a 10-minute break to get some coffee. We'll come back here at 3:30 for our next panel. Thank you again. Really wonderful conversation.